I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times. Welcome to a video conference edition of the New York Times Close Up. The coronavirus has disrupted life in America in ways we have never seen before. Tens of millions are staying at home. The stock market is cratered. The economy probably already in recession. Covering this huge story is a major challenge for the media, print, TV, online, social media as well. How are we doing? Sticking to the facts, or is there some sensationalism? And is Donald Trump using his daily televised briefings to update Americans on a true crisis, or are they a political propaganda substitute for his rallies? Lots to talk about with Ben Smith, the media columnist for the New York Times, and Mara Gay, a member of the Times editorial board. Ben, in your column the other day, you quoted Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook saying, well, in politics, there's a lot of gray area. In science, things are more black and white. Well, if you listen to Donald Trump and Dr. Fauci, they might disagree with that, or they might well disagree with each other. Are things black and white in science or not?
Yeah, I think that's one of the really striking things about this crisis. It's been a challenge for the American political media, and I think in a place in which I think social media companies have done really well, which is that, if you're running a cable news show, you want people disagreeing with each other, you want conflict, you want drama. If you get 10 public health professionals on there, they're all basically going to agree. There's not a lot of argument among the public health folks right now. They're giving the same advice, which is essentially social distancing. Meanwhile, the tech companies, which have been beaten up rightly for years for kind of allowing crazy political content to dominate them, I think, their engineers, they really like the black and white advice from the WHO. They've been very, very aggressive about essentially treating political argument when they don't, when it seems to contradict health guidelines as bad health information. They've taken down sort of political essays about, well, maybe I have another theory about public health by people who don't know anything when the WHO says they're garbage, which is very, very aggressive, and I think have basically done a pretty good job.
Mara, does the president look like he's in charge of this crisis? There's the old saying about not changing horses in midstream. On the other hand, you want to change a horse if yours is standing still or drowning. What about that? How does this play politically for next November, which obviously is a long time from now when this is changing day to day?
Well, Sam, I think it depends where you're sitting, which I guess was true before the coronavirus, but is more viscerally true now. If the virus has yet to come to your community and you are in the 40% or 30% of the country that is in Mr. Trump's extremely solid base, then you might really think that he's doing a great job. But if you're sitting in New York or New Orleans, right, in Louisiana, which is a red state, you might be thinking to yourself that this is not going so well. I mean, essentially, President Trump has abdicated any responsibility and really any marshaling of resources to the states, which are on the front lines fighting these battles. So to some extent, how well your community fares has much more to do at this point with your governor and the kind of resources that he or she can marshal than it does with President Trump. I mean, even the declaration that the market's going to be back open, the economy is going to, or the economy, excuse me, is going to be back open by Easter. Not only is that horrific to the ears of public health experts, but it's also not something that the president can do. Governors are the ones who actually can make those decisions state by state.
And Ben, how is the president's daily briefing playing? Does he look like he's in charge? Does he look presidential? Or is this all playing to what some people obviously see as strengths and some as weaknesses, the distrust of experts, the sort of culture war, blaming it on the Chinese? Do these ultimately come out as pluses or minuses?
I mean, I think that people are much less likely to judge the president on how he's doing in the briefings than ultimately in how where we are in a few months. I think it's not gonna. I mean, there have been these huge administrative failures around testing in particular that that have real consequences. I think Mara is totally right that the that the state level action is where people are focused. I mean, I've been looking at a lot of local TV where they don't really cover the political stories much. They don't do a lot of accountability reporting. They've been playing it pretty, just sort of like the president says this, here's what's happening nationally over the last few weeks. And that content and playing the briefings and whatever, and that content over the last few days has shifted really very abruptly into there is a horrible crisis in our community. And I think people's experience of this is going to shift from being this kind of talking head driven political story to something horrific in their communities.
Mara, just from watching TV and reading what we read online and in print, the person who seems to be fairly heroic in all of this is Governor Cuomo. Does that seem to be a reasonable consensus?
I think that there is plenty of time in the aftermath to do the kind of accountability journalism that we'll have more time to do when we're not covering the day-to-day crisis. And maybe Governor Cuomo should have shut things down sooner. Maybe he should have ordered more ventilators sooner and been paying closer attention. And, that's certainly something that in most countries in the Western world would be led by the White House, by the federal government. Here in the United States, not so much. But all of that said, in terms of where we are and have been for the past couple of weeks, the governor of New York has, I think, played an extraordinary role, not just in showing what government can actually do and what a public servant who knows how to govern can get done in a crisis, but also in showing leadership that encourages people. I mean, every day he's offering very difficult facts to New Yorkers. He's not sugarcoating it, but yet, people who watch his briefings, myself included, it's clear that he's not inducing panic. I mean, there's something very comforting about watching someone in charge who's competent. It's the opposite effect that you get from watching Donald Trump's press conferences. Governor Cuomo, this plays to his strengths. He knows exactly what levers to pull. He knows how to get these masks. He's got people in China right now looking for ventilators. This is the guy you want in charge in this kind of a crisis.
And of course, it hasn't stopped the feud between him and Mayor de Blasio.
It's very true. Although, in a sense, I think, to Ben's point, that kind of coverage and story has really fallen by the wayside because readers are not interested in it. But also, I think, because the governor has, and I think New Yorkers are grateful for this, has really taken ownership over this response and in a way that, kind of allows the mayor to be in the shadow. And that's where he is right now. And I think most people in this state are just fine with it.
Ben, what about the conservative media, Fox News and others that did not take ownership of the crisis, sort of belittled it, at least in the beginning? As you pointed out, Rupert Murdoch or his family seemed to be at odds with his own network, his own company. How are they adjusting to what seems to everyone else to be a genuine crisis?
Yeah, this was really clear in the sort of late February, early March, as it became clear that this was a national crisis, as a lot of the national media started questioning the federal response and wondering what Donald Trump had done. And Fox News, instead of basically like every other media outlet covering the pandemic and saying this is a huge crisis, went into kind of defense mode and spent 3 weeks defending Donald Trump against what they saw as political attacks, and basically, with some real notable exceptions like Tucker Carlson, just missed the story and had hosts and guests telling their readers not to worry about it so much and calling the coverage of it a hoax. Public health people think that this may wind up killing some of those viewers. I mean, this is a totally different kind of story than the political media is used to, and this was like a real catastrophe. And so I spent a week kind of calling around people at Fox just saying, what the hell happened? And the answer really is that nobody is in charge there. Rupert Murdoch certainly takes it seriously. He canceled his birthday party because he didn't want to catch coronavirus. But there's no real line from anybody except Donald Trump to the powerful hosts there who speak to millions of Americans every night. And they are in this kind of, circular relationship with Trump. I think Chris Hayes was saying he's not sure whether it's state-run TV or a TV-run state, but in either case, they were focused on playing political defense at a moment when that was just the wrong story.
I think you're really right about that, that it's a little bit not quite comparable, of course, to the AIDS crisis, that I think it changed the whole perception of relationships with gay people and gay rights when everyone else realized how many gay people they actually knew and perhaps didn't realize were gay. Here, as people are getting sick from the virus and even dying from the virus, they're realizing this is not a hoax. It's not a case of sensationalism. It's a real crisis that hasn't been dealt with effectively, and certainly we weren't prepared for.
Yeah, I think the media wasn't prepared for it, right? I mean, very few of us were jumping up and down and screaming in January, as obviously everybody should have been. But also, we're in this country where people broadly don't trust the media, where there are these huge divisions, where the media has very political instincts and is very politicized. And I think when you look back and say, wow, the United States is doing worse at this than virtually any other industrialized country, like one of the pieces of public health infrastructure that's pretty shaky here is the media.
It still seems a little bit like the beginning of a bad 1950s science fiction movie. Does this affect the way people are going to get their news, do you think, in the future?
I mean, in a million ways, probably. I mean, the most, including from us on Zoom with our relatives wandering around in the background. But but I think, the most immediate is just that local news and local newspapers in particular have been on life support themselves. And I think you're seeing them collapse left and right now. And it's very hard to think through how you rescue these institutions that, it's not like, they're not like restaurants or like, airlines where if we, once they weather this crazy moment, things will go back to normal. Like normal for them was catastrophic. And so I think I think the biggest issue is that people are both feeling the incredible need for local journalism right now and watching it collapse.
And that's something you've been particularly conscientious about as head of BuzzFeed. You were also in charge of The City, the local news site. Mara, what are the consequences of the so-called mainstream media not covering local news, both in New York City and elsewhere around the country?
I think that, we've already seen the consequences, not just in the rise of Donald Trump himself, but in the conspiracy theories that were circulating until the past 2 weeks, really, about the coronavirus being a hoax. I think if you're living in a rural community that maybe hasn't been quite touched by this so far, or maybe it has been, but you have no local news reporters who are writing about it, who you trust, then you're far more prone to view this through the partisan lens that we've come accustomed to over the past 10 years. Whereas if your neighbor's kid is a local news reporter who comes home one day and says, guess what happened at our local hospital today? We need to pay attention. That's a very different message, because it's not just about the information that we're receiving. It's about who we're receiving it from and what our relationship is with those people. And I think I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I'm thinking a lot right now as well about just the value of accountability journalism at local and state and national levels. It's one thing to pay someone to have opinions, and that's great. Listen, I'm an opinion maker, but it's a whole other thing to have a newspaper or a news publication support you to do accountability journalism and support you in doing the kind of gumshoe reporting that sends people out to hospitals, out to communities, out to businesses. And there's so much value in that. And I think if that's the lesson that we learn here, that's a real silver lining.
Ben, what about whether we should be carrying those Trump briefings every day live? Is this giving the president too much airtime? Is it propaganda, advertising for the president, or does this perform a real service for the country?
This debate kind of drives me nuts. There's this big argument over whether or not radio and TV in particular should be essentially stream the president's briefings. And I saw that, for instance, the Seattle NPR affiliate decided not to, and MSNBC I think is deciding not to. And the thing is, I don't know how many listeners of the Seattle NPR affiliate are enthralled to President Trump right now, but I doubt a lot. And the same with MSNBC viewers. And the outlets that are having these debates are the ones for whom they are least relevant. And the outlets that are in fact watched by Trump supporters who really want to see him and trust him are not even considering not taking his briefings. So I kind of think it's like a 1960s debate being held now by people who have nothing better to do in order to sort of project a kind of moral righteousness. But I don't really see what it matters.
Speaking of things that don't seem to matter much anymore, whatever happened to the presidential campaign? Mara, there obviously is still a race for the Democratic nomination. We may not have primaries at all, much less postponed. We may not have a Democratic convention. Where is that race even going, or is it?
It feels like forever ago that we thought that the presidential race would just, be the marathon that we had to endure this year as Americans. And it turns out that that was the least of it. And that's pretty neat and tidy at this point. I mean, I think, one concern among Democrats right now is the visibility or lack thereof of Joe Biden. He has actually been trying to speak to the American people. He hasn't gotten that much coverage. I think that's in part because people know right now that he's not in charge. So what they really want to hear is, how many ventilators did my governor secure for our state today? And that's understandable. So there is more time to let this play out. As all of us know, a day or a week can be in eternity in politics. So there's plenty of time for that. I think that the other question is going to be whether there are other leaders that emerge and kind of what that looks like. I mean, certainly if this had happened, if the outbreak had happened 6 months ago or a year ago, we might be talking about a President Cuomo, but it's a little late for that. So, I guess what I would say is let me be humble enough to say, even with the last 6 months, we have no idea what's about to happen.
Yeah,
Ben,
I mean, I think that's totally right. I would just add that the online gambling markets now have a Cuomo nomination at 7% and a Sanders nomination at 6%. So you're not the only one with that in the back of your head. But the question of what is the role of the opposition in a crisis like this is really.
Speaking of Sanders, you had a column recently saying he was right in part about the mainstream media and his criticism. What about Trump in bashing the media, continuing to bash the media? Is there anything to what he says in terms of our sensationalizing this crisis and raising doubts about what he's saying?
I want to say yes, he has a point, but I actually can't think of anything he's saying about the media that's true right now. I mean, the media was, if anything, not alarmist enough, obviously, in retrospect. I mean, I keep thinking about this thing the former governor of Utah, Mike Leavitt, said, that anything said before a pandemic seems alarmist, and and when you look back, whatever that was, it will seem inadequate. And that's just obviously true, that neither the coverage nor the government response was anywhere near as alarmist as it should have been in retrospect. I mean, I think he has both benefited from years of attacks on, the mainstream media, and also deepened them in terms of, the intense distrust among Republicans right now for what we do. And which, I'm sure at some level is partially over the years we've brought upon ourselves, and partially the, inheritance of like the Vietnam era, but it's obviously a huge problem for the country.
You also wrote in your very first column in the Times as a media columnist that the success of the New York Times online has become a threat of a little bit to the media. Why is that? That seems obviously counterintuitive.
I mean, I think that if you look at almost any business right now, what you see is these trend toward consolidation, toward there being one dominant player, whether it's Google or Amazon or Facebook, maybe one or two others, Twitter or Snapchat, and then almost nothing else. And in these huge national digital markets, and the Times is becoming the dominant newspaper. The Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal are in there. And then, the next 100 newspapers, next 200 newspapers don't have as many subscribers combined as the New York Times. And so I'm not sure it's not something the Times is doing wrong, but it's something about the structure of the economy right now that you get this tendency toward monopoly. And so right now, I mean, if you look at what's happening in New York City, which is the center of the crisis, the Times has hundreds of reporters that it's pulling off other desks like my desk, the media desk, and elsewhere to swarm hospitals in Queens and Brooklyn. Is doing just extraordinary coverage of New York. I think if you see this crisis hit Chicago, you won't see that because there aren't that many reporters. I mean, they will do their best with much slimmer resources, but I think all over the country, there aren't that many journalists.
One of my concerns, I'm concerned for other cities, since this is a pandemic that is disproportionately hitting areas where there is density. I'm very concerned for cities that don't have the same resources, be it capital, but also reporters on the ground that New York has. What happens, if this hits a struggling city and the governor isn't doing the right thing, or the local news can't report on it. And I, in a case like that, you would hope that the White House would step up, but there's no one home.
There's no one home, and there's no one to hold them accountable locally and to some extent nationally as well.
That's right.
You had a column also about impartiality on the part of the press. Let me ask both of you, how far do we go in pushing that? Obviously, Mara, you're in a slightly different position as a member of the editorial board. You are supposed to have an opinion. We, as reporters, correspondents are not, and Ben, you as a columnist are. But what about people who are reporting politics, reporting what the president is doing? How far, and everyone obviously has an opinion, everyone has a predisposition, how far do we go in insulating ourselves from that?
I mean, this is a age-old debate in this business, and where's the line between kind of sensibility and opinion? And I think Trump thrives in the sort of gaps in that debate, and is interested in provoking it and daring us to call him a liar, so that when we call him a liar, he can say, see, these people are biased against me. I guess I think different journalists and different media outlets play different roles here, and there are people whose job is just the facts man and shouldn't be doing that, and there are people whose job is to be really, really, direct and blunt about what they see. I think the New York Times' job is toward the former. BuzzFeed, where I was before, our job was to be a little blunter and to speak to a different generation of people with a different outlook. But I also think, again, that this is a little like the debate of whether the Seattle NPR station should take Trump live. I don't know who the New York Times is speaking to, who is on the fence about whether Donald Trump is telling the truth, and using that word liar is just going to push him over and say, wow, that changed my mind. And so I think this is a little bit of debate the media is having with itself.
Mara, what do you think? I mean, some people say we shouldn't vote, we shouldn't enroll in a party. Of course, if you don't do that in New York City, you preclude yourself from voting for Democrats who really are tantamount to election. How far do we go?
I mean, listen, I have actually very strong feelings about voting. When I became a journalist, I did not give up my rights as a citizen. And I think, if anything, journalists are more informed. I just think there's a certain humility that our job requires, no matter what side of the fence we're on, the opinion side, whether we're writing about sports or politics, or we're news reporters. I did news reporting for the Wall Street Journal for 10 years. I was a news reporter for 10 years, and I was at the Wall Street Journal for 6 years as a news reporter. I did not agree with 99% of what the editorial board at the Wall Street Journal wrote. But the humility, I think, comes in acknowledging that as humans, we all come to the job with experiences, with biases, with favoritism, and we have to work against that every day. But I also feel very strongly that our job as journalists is not to be stenographers. Our job is to report the truth. So I don't care if it's Donald Trump or if it's the next Democratic president or whoever it is, somebody comes out and says there is no coronavirus, it doesn't exist. I really think our job is to say, this person said that, but that's not true. Not, oh, but somebody else says X, Y, Z. And I do think that that's a really sacred responsibility, and that when we abdicate that, we basically become a voice for somebody's propaganda.
Let me ask both of you one last question, if I may, and that is, with all the criticism, with all our statements that Trump has not recognized the depth of this crisis early enough. Why is his popularity going up in the polls?
I have to say that I've been looking at some of these polls. Some of the poll size, there was one poll where the poll size was 500 people. So I'm a little bit skeptical when things are changing day to day and this virus seems to be hitting one community and then the next. I think people are very stressed out. But then again, listen, traditionally a crisis is a time that, is very helpful to the president in charge. But here's the reality. As Ben pointed out earlier, ultimately the president can only say so much. If coronavirus is hitting your community and you don't know where the ventilators are, it's not going to sound so impressive.
Dan, a real quick answer.
Yeah, I guess I would just say that I think if you look at where George Bush was after 9/11, a very divisive president who was suddenly in the 80s, 90s popularity, I think, Trump really hasn't managed to rally the country around him the way you would expect.
Thanks to Mara Gay, Ben Smith of the New York Times. I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and for CUNY TV, thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the New York Times Close Up next week.